And he took me to Victoria Station. He found the station master. I sat in the station master's office until the train came. He put me on the train, found another passenger who could tell me when we got to Pune and when to get off. When we got to Pune, the only thing I ever had to do on that whole trip by myself was get a taxi cab and get to the Mehera Hotel. It was the only thing I had to handle. And I walked into the hotel, walked up to the desk, and I didn't identify myself. I said to the man at the desk, I need a telephone. And he picked up the phone and he dialed. And he listened. He handed me the receiver, and it was Eruch on the other end. They had called the hotel. And Eruch said that Baba had said I was to wait at the hotel till 3:30, and one of them would come for me an hour before the darshan started. And it was Meherjee, lovely Meherjee, who came and picked me up and drove me out to Guruprasad. And even if you had never been there, you've all seen pictures of it. And there was a long driveway that went up to the front of Guruprasad and curved under a portico. The car would stop, and when you get out, you were facing these big double doors into the main hall on the other side of the veranda. So I got out of Meherjee's car on that side near the steps. Got out, bent over, and when I stood up and I looked, the doors were open, and there was Baba sitting at the back of that hall. And I went running past Meherjee, running up the steps. And when I stepped over that threshold, I felt again that same wave of love that I had felt in the lagoon cabin, only it was so powerful, so overwhelming, that it stopped me in my tracks, and my legs started shaking. You know, and I just stood there, and then Baba put out his arms and, come on. And I went running into his arms and burst into tears. And, you know, it takes half a minute to tell what happened, but it all was right there all at once, like it was the first time I had a home. And I grew up as a middle child. I always thought I had brought myself up. I tried to be very quiet, stay out of the way, right? Grow up without anybody noticing. And I realized in that moment he had always been there. He had raised me, had always taken care of me. He always would. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely loved, completely accepted, and utterly safe. And I knew that that's the way it was, that's the way it was going to be. And it was an absolute guarantee. That was always going to be there. And it was like my mind came to a screeching halt. Because I let go of everything. I didn't have to think about anything. Because I was with him and I was safe. And when I stepped back from that embrace, Baba had tears in his eyes. He was crying. And I stood there, looked at him, and he looked at me, and he nodded. And I nodded back. And he said, do you have any questions? No, Baba. No questions. I had already known too many people who had asked advice of Baba, not taken it, and gotten themselves into a lot of trouble. So I figured if there was anything he wanted me to know, he would tell me in his own good time, and I wasn't going to push him. And then he called, the women had been in Mehera's room, and there was a louvered door from her room into that hall, so they had watched my meeting with Baba, and he began to call them out. He introduced Mehera, and he said, she loves me best. Mani, go here. When I came in, I hadn't seen her. Because when I first came into that hall, I didn't see anybody but Baba And then all I saw were his eyes. There was nothing else in the room. Those eyes filled the room. And there were shafts of light coming out from behind his eyes. And I thought, if he drops his eyes, if he closes them, I'll drown in that light. You know, and then it was just, again, one of those things that never happened to me. I'd never had an experience like that. But then later I became aware Dr. Goha was there. She was standing behind Baba. Eruch came out. Meherjee came in behind me. And then he began calling the women. And finally, I have lost a lot of what happened in that original hour. You know, it's gone from my memory, but I think a lot of it was, you know, was the trip good? Did you sleep well? Have you eaten well? The courtesy things that Baba always asked his visitors. And finally he told me, he said, you sit at my feet. And I sat down there, and he said, now, did you read the family letter? And I thought, well, he's going to throw me out, and I could care less. I had seen him. I've had 5 minutes. It's more than I ever thought I'd have. You know, that's fine. And I said, yes, Baba, I had read it. He said, what did it say? I said, well, Baba, you said people shouldn't come a great distance or a great expense. And he said, you came anyway? I said, yes, Baba. He said, it's all right. I'm glad you came in spite of the letter. And I said, so now what are you going to do when you leave here this afternoon? And I misunderstood. I thought he was asking me what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I just said, well, I guess I'm going back to work. And he said, no, this afternoon. What are you going to do? Well, Air India had already told me I didn't have a chance of getting back to Bombay to get that 1 a.m. flight back to New York. There was no way. There were no flights from Pune to Bombay at the time. It would have to be train or car, and there was no way to make it. And Air India was not going to fly back to New York again for 5 days. Bless their little hearts. So what I had figured was, well, you know, I'll probably have to just go sit in a hotel somewhere and wait. And I told Baba that. I said, I guess I can just go sit in a hotel. And he said, no sightseeing. I said, no, Baba, I know that. He said, well, you won't sit in a hotel for 5 days. You will come here every day and sit with me until the plane goes. And as it happened, Air India's next flight was going to be the day after that Sahabas ended, so that I would be there until the end of that Sahabas. And Baba said, now what will your office say if you stay? I said, well, Baba, they couldn't understand why I was just coming. I was going to be here less than 20 hours. And they said, if I want to stay longer, to cable them. He said, make sure you do. So by that time, that hour had gone, and they were ready to open the doors to let this mob in. And Baba said, you know, sit closer to my feet or you'll get crushed. Well, they opened the doors in the back, and there were windows on either side of that door with about this high off the floor, and they were also open. So the moment they opened the doors, people also started diving through the windows and running toward Baba as fast as they could go. Absolutely no decorum whatsoever, and he loved it. He sat up there and he slapped his knee and he laughed. Just loved it. And I turned around at one point. I was looking over my shoulder at this crowd, and I see this woman bearing down on me. And she got to me and she planted her hand on top of my head, used me for a pivot, and swung herself over me to get behind Baba, and sat herself down behind his chair. And there were children who had gotten separated from their parents, and they were being passed overhead, you know, through that mob. It was wonderful, and Baba was enjoying every minute of it. So everybody settled down, and Baba had said he did not want to give any discourses. He wasn't breaking his seclusion. He was inviting people into it. And in order to help him keep it, he didn't want to give any discourses. He didn't want to be asked any questions. We were just to be there with him. So some of the Indians who had come, the different groups, had planned entertainment for him. And this day there was a young lady there, a singer from Bombay. And Baba asked her to sing a song for me about Mehera. And he asked me, do you know who Mehera is? And I didn't. And this is a story that he often told people and would tell different parts of it. But he said Mehera was a Hindu saint who had given up a kingdom, a family, everything she had, to spend her life wandering, singing the praises of her Lord Krishna. And he got very serious, and it was the only serious moment in the whole 5 days. And he said, Mehera never put anyone or anything between herself and Krishna. And he repeated it. And I got the point. That he was saying, I am your Krishna. You will never put anyone or anything between us. Only serious moment in the whole 5 days. The rest of it was just tremendous gales of laughter the whole 5 days. With Baba, laughing and taking part in this. His twin nephews putting on a skit. One of them played Baba and one played Eruch. There are pictures of this. Baba laughing so hard that he was in tears, and you could see the pictures with his handkerchief up to his eyes. These kids were so funny. And an interesting sidelight to that took place on a day when after Fred Winnefeld had arrived. Now Fred had a sense of humor, but this hit him the wrong way. He thought it was sacrilegious. And he couldn't see how hard Baba was laughing, how everybody else was laughing, how the Mandali were laughing. He thought it was wrong. But he said about 24 hours later, it hit him. He had a heck of a nerve seeing this as sacrilegious when Baba was sitting up there laughing his heart out and being tremendously entertained by these kids. Well, then at another point, Baba asked me if I knew why St. Francis loved Jesus more than Peter did. And he said it was because Francis never met Jesus. That his love and his longing was that much stronger because he never knew him. And how moved I was by that, for Baba to tell me after waiting 5 years, being jealous of everybody else who had met him, hating them. And to me, it was a very, very sweet thing to do. And at another point, he asked me if I'd read any of his books. And there wasn't a great deal available then, but I had read The Perfect Master. God Speaks was out by that time. I didn't mention it. I said I had read the original 5-volume discourses. I had found God's Man. I'd read Avatar, Perfect Master, and I stopped. He said, have you read God Speaks? And I said, well, Baba, I tried. And I got to page 64, and I didn't understand a word. And he laughed. I heard that chuckle, which people sometimes heard in his throat. It was just sort of thing. And his hands went up like this. Laughed. He said, never mind, it's not important. Don't bother. And I have never been able to get through it. And it was, because at the time he'd asked everybody to read it. Told everybody to read it. Told some people they had to understand it. So I've never been able to do it. Well, that first day, toward the end of it, his hour became 6. And I was never any good at sitting in the lotus position on the floor. And And Baba noticed. I started moving around. He saved me from a great embarrassment because what I was about to do, not having my shoes on, was to stick my feet in him, which I did not know was a no-no. Had no idea. And he caught it. And what he did to save me embarrassment, I mean, he didn't care, but he knew what would happen if I did it in front of all those Indians who knew I shouldn't be doing it. He just reached in. We are born to this, and you are not, and there is no reason for you to be uncomfortable. And he said, we will have a chair brought for you. And he caught it, before I just, without knowing, did something terrible. So he had a chair brought and put against the sidewall and had Ronald Gailey come out and sit with me so she could interpret much of what was being said was in many different languages. So she was sitting on my left, and I'm sitting here, and we are now looking at Baba sort of in half profile. And I just sat there and I stared directly at him, and I never took my eyes off him because Liz had warned me. She said, never take your eyes off him because the moment you do, he'll turn and he'll look at you and you'll miss it. And it had happened to her in 58. She kept thinking Baba never looked at her. And later people told her, but he did, and you were looking the other way. So I just sat there and I just stared at him. And every once in a while, he was so quick. He would whip around. Are you happy? Over and over. Are you happy? Are you happy? And Rana would give me a little nudge, answer him. And of course I was ecstatic. Yes, Mom. Yes, Mom. Well, that day finally, I think, went on till 10 o'clock. And I found being with Baba, that vitality around him, so completely exhausting. When I went back to the hotel, I just went straight to bed without any dinner, and I went to sleep like that. And the next morning, this is the second morning, I heard this shouting downstairs, and that was Fred's arrival. He was barreling up the stairs, yelling for me, and we did this jig out on the hotel balcony. We were both there. Baba had not asked me how I had gotten to India, didn't say a word about it. But Fred got to see Baba by himself that morning. And Baba said, Fred, how did Ann get here? So Fred told him the story about Jenny and Liz giving me the money, giving up their own chance to go. And Baba had tears running down his cheeks. And he said to Fred, Baba is touched by such love for Baba and for a friend. And then he said to Fred, Fred, I love Ann very much. Some of you knew Fred, and some of you have seen pictures of him. He's quite short, very precise. He came running back to the Napier Hotel, came banging on my door. And he stood there with his feet apart, and leaned forward like that, with his hands at his side, and said, Baba says, Fred, I love Ann very much. And then he stood back and he just grinned, It was his first thought, he had to deliver that message. Well, that afternoon, when I saw Baba, Baba said, Fred told me how you got here. Told me what the girls had done. He said, all helped you. And I said, yes, Baba. And he said, all helped you because I helped you. I wanted you to come. And he said, now I have sent a cable to Ginny and Liz. Well, that morning I had tried to write a cable to them. I wanted to tell them that I had seen Baba. And I couldn't find the words. I just didn't have them. So what Baba did, he sent him a cable, all right, and signed my name to it. And it said, Baba says because you have helped me come to Baba. You have made Baba come closer to you. Baba sends his love to you both. He signed it, Love Ann. And then he had Eruch give me a copy of it, and he said, do you think they'll like it? Well, now that Fred was there were two of us sitting against the wall, chair. And again, there were 1,000 people lined up to come up to Baba for darshan. We were sitting there with Rana watching it. And all of a sudden I heard Arnavaz Dada Chanji from the back of the room call out, Harry? And Harry Kenmore had arrived unannounced, come out by taxi and just got in line. There he was, walking up to Baba. Baba said, Harry, what are you doing here? And Harry said, I've come to see my dear Pop. And Baba said, well, your dear Pop is very happy to see his dear son. And then there were 3 of us sitting against the wall. So, and it was obvious, some of the Easterners were very curious about who these 3 people were. And Baba decided to introduce us. And he said, this is Fred Winterfeld from New York, Harry Kenmore from New York, and Ann Conlon from the United States. And he said, why would she have come such a great distance to see me when she had never seen me? Her love brought her, and that love is my gift to her. It was like over and over, Baba confirmed for me everything that I had felt in those years before I'd met him, confirmed that gift I knew he'd given me in the lagoon cabin. Well, finally came the last day, and Baba insisted that we all go back to New York together. Fred, Harry, and myself, and he'd already had their tickets changed to get him on the same flight that I was going to be on. And we were with him the last morning of the actual darshan when Meherjee came running in to say that he'd just had a cable from the Luck Boys that they were to arrive late that afternoon. And this whole thing, and Baba used to stir things up when somebody was in a little bit of trouble and they might not make it or get someplace. And he kept saying, they're not going to make it. They cannot get here in time. With everybody running around in circles. And in the middle of that big hall, everybody is in charge of everything, is trying to figure out what to do to get the Lux there on time. And I was just standing there enjoying the opportunity to stand there and look at Baba. And Baba looked at me and he went, they're crazy. But they got there 10 minutes before that last hour. They came running into the Napier Hotel as Adi was picking up Fred and me and Harry. And so we all went out to Guruprasad for that last afternoon. And Baba, because Irwin and Edward's first meeting with Baba, they were there only for that last hour. He let them sit at his feet and hold a pillow over his feet so nobody would bow down and touch his feet. And I will never forget the expression on Edward's face that he sat there and he looked up at Baba with his mouth open for 5 hours. Never moved. Just in total awe. And then Irwin asked Baba for God realization. And Baba said, we won't talk about that now, listen to the music. Well, on this last afternoon, there were 5,000 people trying to get into Guruprasad because they had been smart enough when Baba had said, you know, you get your hour anytime in those 2 weeks and then you go straight home. Some of them were smart enough to know that he might change his mind. So they had stayed in Pune. And on the last day, he sent out the word that anyone who was still there, whether they had had their hour or not, must come that afternoon to receive prasad. They were to receive it, and they were to leave at once. So it came my turn to go up and get Prasad, and I had this instinct. I wanted to kiss his hand. So as he was handing me the Prasad, it was spontaneous. I leaned down to kiss his hand, and his arm was much lighter than I thought it was, and I was moving too fast. And I punched myself right in the teeth with his fist, with his knuckles. And of course, oh my God, I've skinned his knuckles. But he never let on. He did not make any sign that anything had happened. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. But I took the Prasad, and I started walking out of Guruprasad. And I felt this hand on the back of my neck. And it was Rano. She said, "He didn't mean you, dummy. Go back and sit down. You're not supposed to leave." So that we were all there until it was all over, and Baba had seen every single person who had come that afternoon. At the end of it, he said that Meherjee and Adi were to bring Fred, Harry, the Lux, and me back to him in the morning to say goodbye. Then we would be driven to Bombay, put on the plane home. Now, I knew better. I knew I was as full as it was going to get that time, but I did not want to leave. And so when I went to say goodbye to Baba, I was crying. And I went up to him for his embrace, and he had a disturbed look on his face. And I knew I had caused it, but I didn't really understand it. And the goodbye was very quick. I mean, Rano was the bouncer in those years. You said goodbye, and she got you out the door. And it was very fast. I was aware of that sort of frown on Baba's face. I didn't get it, and I didn't dwell on it. I did remember it after I got home. Well, 18 months later, Baba did what he said he was going to do. He gave another opportunity in his own way, and he called the East-West Gathering. I went back to that with Liz, and it was a very different occasion. There were a lot more people. I had been spoiled rotten 18 months before. Nobody was getting a lot of individual attention, and I resented it. I'd had my very special time. I wanted some more, and I wasn't getting it. And I remember at one point, we spent so much time sitting in this big audience watching people go by Baba and entertainment. I acted like a total spoiled brat. I got up and went to the corner of the stage, and I thought, I'm going to stand here and stare at him until he turns and he looks at me. And I did. I stood there, and I waited. It took about a half an hour. And finally he turned and he looked at me with a look that you would give a kid. And you're saying, all right, I have looked. Now will you please sit down? That kind of. And I didn't know at the time that everybody was going through this thing where they felt Baba pulling away. And it was the beginning, of that pulling back. Francis Brabazon described it as the father who says to the child, now I have work to do and you must wait. And then there is the gentle closing of the door. But we didn't know that about each other. We all thought it was just us. So when the last day came of the East-West Gathering, Bob again said all the Westerns should come out, say goodbye to him. Well, I was just so grateful I was going to get another embrace. I was going to get that close. I was not thinking about saying goodbye. It's just, I'm going to get another embrace. So when I walked up to him, I was ecstatically happy. And I leaned over, kissed him on both cheeks, and said, thank you, Baba, thank you. And when I pulled back, like he was on fire. He was glowing. And this grin from ear to ear. And I remembered the year before and the way I had left. And he reached up out of his chair like this to my face. You know, now you got it. You know, that I want you to be as happy leaving me as you were when you came. You take me with you. There is no separation. I'm always with you. And it's important to me that you be happy. I want you to be happy. I mean that. And yes, it would be nice if you remembered to say thank you once in a while. That is still my most vivid memory of Baba's face. That once in my lifetime, it never happened again. I pleased him, and it took so little. It took so little just for me to be happy and say thank you and to remember him. It was all he asked. And I think I knew then that I was never going to see him again. That whatever that part of that relationship, the physical relationship, whatever I had to learn then, whatever he had to say to me, was complete. It was over. Whatever came afterwards was going to be different. It would grow and change. But that was finished. It was done. And I do still remember his face at that moment. When I'm in trouble and everybody's mad at me, that's the look I remember. Like, once I did it right, and it pleased him. And that's the story. Sure. Somebody might remember that I forgot something. But this was Baba's twin nephews, Rustom and Sohrab, which were the biggest practical jokers in the world. And they were 15 years old at the time. And they decided, not knowing there were any visitors expected at Guruprasad that day, to pull a joke. So they rounded up, I think it was Rustom who actually did the dress up. They rounded up a dress, a hat with a heavy veil, a purse, heels, probably stockings, and they went off somewhere. The two of them, and Marijuana Mystery was with them. And they got Rustom all dressed up in this. And they come back to Guruprasad. Well, in the meantime, this is the setup, right? They have just gotten my cable at Guruprasad that I am on my way. So an American woman is expected. So Rustom, he walks in the front door. And he heads right for Baba's room, where Eruch is sitting on the floor outside. Baba's resting. Eruch sees this woman bearing down on him, and he gets up to his feet. Wait a minute. Right, and this woman tries to push past him, and Eruch starts wrestling with her. Right? She doesn't say anything. And he said, "Wait, you can't go in there." And then Eruch happened to look over his shoulder at Baba, and Baba said, "It's not Ann. That isn't Ann."
Baba was in his undershirt.
He didn't have any shirt on. He just had a dhoti on. And Baba just picked it up and ran with that joke. Right? Told Eruch, don't say anything. Baba started calling people to come and meet Ann. He called everybody who was in Guruprasad. He sent word to Bindra House, where Eruch's family, the women, were making lunch to bring to Guruprasad, and said, "Drop everything, come at once, Ann has come." So they started to change their clothes, and Eruch's mother said, no, he said, "Come at once." They came in their aprons, in the clothes in which they were cooking for Guruprasad. They just dropped everything and they came. Eruch's sister. Well, Mani and Mehera started to come out of Mehera's room to meet Ann Conlon. And Mani looked at that purse that Rustom was carrying, and she saw it had a broken clasp, and she recognized it as hers. So Mehera was just reaching for Rustom to embrace him, under the impression that he's Ann Conlon, and Mani just stepped between them and said, Mehera, she has a very bad cold, so don't. Mani knew better than to break the joke. I mean, she realized Baba had to have a hand in this, so she wasn't going to say, that's Rustom or Sohrab. Right? Baba had sent Rano out to show this woman around Guruprasad, and Rano's reaction, she's the last American left in that ashram. She takes one look. She's absolutely mortified that this is what America is sending to see Mehera Baba. Right? He's got this hat with this veil, and he's saying, yep, nope, yep, nope, and chewing gum. Well, the hairy legs came up. They were all in there. Everybody fell for this except Eruch's sister was sitting there, and she was looking at Rustom from the back, and she happened to look down and notice that he hadn't shaved his legs. And she knew it was one of those kids. That an American woman would have shaved legs. So she knew she wasn't going to break that joke either. Baba had everybody within 10 miles who was there for that darshan come and meet this woman. They were all in Guruprasad. And he just went on with it until it ran out of steam, and then he just told them that it was a joke. But the only thing I knew about it was during that week, Francis Brabazon was there at the time, and at one point he introduced me to Nariman Dadachandji. He said, Nariman, this is Ann Conlon. And Nariman blushed. He turned bright red from the neck up, and I'm looking at him. And Francis laughed, and he said, oh, right, he met you this morning. Naren had been one of the people who got caught in that joke. That's still one of the women Mandali's favorite stories. I love it. But nobody told me the whole story. I didn't hear it until 1971. I didn't know what had really happened.
Any other questions for Ann?
Yeah, I think everyone in the end would be interested in what you're doing right now with all the books and all that excitement.
Well, I do run the Sharia Press book room. And in some cases, I write them, edit them, sell them, ship them. And
Sounds like a lot of work.
yeah, right. Right. Where is the help? And at the moment, this is a project that came up unexpectedly. It wasn't my idea, and I don't know why I never thought of it, but I didn't, somebody else's idea. That I am beginning work on a biography of Margaret Krask to bring both her life with Baba and her professional life together. People in the world of ballet knew very little about Margaret's life with Baba. There's still some really pretty crazy stories going around about Margaret and this guru in India. And on the other hand, very few Baba people knew much about her professional life. So it was Sheila Krensky who, I had been involved in Margaret's care while she lived in Myrtle Beach. We were very old friends, and I loved her very much. And when she died, it was very hard on me. I missed her a lot. So one day, Sheila said to me, Ian, why don't you do Margaret's biography? Well, I wasn't sure. It had never occurred to me during her lifetime. And I thought, well, there's one way to see what's out there. What kind of cooperation would I get, particularly in the world of ballet, if I decide to do this? Because they can be a very closed, cliquey group. I mean, aside from Margaret's dancers. I mean, what's going to happen when I try to get to the rest of the professionals with whom Margaret was associated during her lifetime? So what I did, I sent what is called an author's query to the New York Times Sunday Book Review. When they have space, they will run these little letters from authors, very formal. And I said, for a biography of dance teacher Margaret Krask, I would appreciate any information, pictures, diaries, letters, and gave my address at Shariah Press. Well, what they tell you at the Times is basically don't hold your breath. Number one, it can take, if they do use it, it can take up to a year because they have so many requests, so little room. And the other thing is, the odds are 1,000 to 1 that they would ever use it at all. 6 weeks after I sent it in, it appeared in the Sunday Times book review on the first anniversary of Mehera's death. And this is going to be interesting. So the first thing that happened, I get a letter within 2 days from a man named David Vaughn, who is a biographer of Frederick Ashton, choreographer. Margaret had worked with him and they had been very close. He said, I know where the information is. I saw it when I was researching my book, and this is where you go. This is what you look for. And I wish you all the best, because she deserves the tribute. He didn't know me from hole and wall. I got a couple of more letters. I got a young dancer from New York whom I'd never heard of, sent me a list of names, addresses, and unlisted telephone numbers of people like Agnes DeMille, Sally Wilson, all these dancers. Also wished me well and offered to loan me any ballet books that he had that I might need for research. He also didn't know me. I got a telephone call from a woman who had lived in the Wellington Hotel, knew Margaret for years, had been a book researcher. She saw this thing in the Times. She didn't call me first. She started calling people in New York. She went over to the Lincoln Center Library of the Performing Arts, kicked up their computer, and went far enough that there were hundreds, she saw hundreds of references to Margaret Krask. Then she calls me. And she was wonderful. She said, this is what you do. You have to come to New York. This is where the stuff is. Here are the names and the telephone numbers, the names of the periodicals. She said, if you want any help when you get here, call me back. And bang. And phone. I got a couple other letters from people who've been associated with it. And then one day, 2 weeks later, I get a telephone call. It's a woman with a British accent. And she starts asking me, like, who am I? What do I know about Margaret Krask? And she just, you could tell she's being very cautious. She's not going to commit herself. Finally, she says to me, she said, well, do you know about Miss Krask's school in London, in West Street? And I said, oh, yes, in the 30s. She said, but there was another woman involved in that school. And I said, yes, Mabel Ryan. She said, oh, you do know. Then she told me that she had studied with Margaret in London in the 30s. She remembered when Margaret had gone off to India and they all thought she was crazy. And she loved her very much. She did not know that Margaret had died until she saw my letter in the Times. I think that she is the woman called Deirdre, about whom Margaret wrote a story in her second book. She's from Ireland, the dancer. She met, Baba asked to meet her without her knowing it, so that Margaret and Quentin Todd attacked this girl for bad dancing, got her so upset, right? Do you remember that story? And then said, oh, by the way, this is a friend of ours, Marijuana Ronnie. And the girl, she's sobbing, and she didn't even notice. And then later, they told her her next performance was just terrific. You know, she'd corrected mistakes, and she was fantastic. And I think that's who she is. Her name is Deirdre Moss. The time is right. She's the right age. And she was there studying with Margaret at that time. Now, I haven't told her that I think she's Deirdre because I don't know if she would remember that, what happened. But she has agreed to tape every single thing she remembers about Margaret and Mabel Ryan and those days. And one thing has led to another. And just one person leads me another. And it's like, Baba is just dropping it in my lap. I said, Don Mahler, whom most of you know, is unemployed in the dance world until January. Well, he's going to spend from now to then at the Lincoln Center Library, starting the research, Xeroxing things, calling people, and setting it up. And it's like, I've waited 40 years for this book. I have spent the last 30 editing other people's stuff. And this one's mine. Oh, I remember my first meeting with Margaret very well. The first two. It was after Ginny and Liz had decided that it was safe to introduce me to other Bible lovers. And there was a film showing at Fred and Ella Winterfeld's house. And Liz and Ginny took me. And I was introduced to this woman who was half my size, but such presence. I remember her standing there with that cane. The cane is out here, a little like heads up. And I realized she had 10 feet personal space around her. Right? And I respected that. I stood back and I put my hands behind my back, and I spent the next 30 years standing that way with Margaret Kress, more or less. Maybe not physically, but in my mind, this is her space, and that's what she's going to get. And I was in awe, total awe of her. She was pleasant. Well, a few weeks later, there was another public film showing at some church, and I was there. And Margaret was there with her dancers. It was the day that Bunty and Harry Bernstein had gotten married. And then Margaret came with all the dancers from the wedding film showing. When the film was over, they had been down front. And they started to come back up the side aisle. And I was standing there in a row of seats, and I saw Margaret. She was walking up that side aisle. And I thought, do I say hello or not? She's not going to remember me. I didn't know what to do. So I'm just standing there. And she comes up that aisle, and she's got that head up. She's looking straight ahead of her. She doesn't look to the left or right. She starts to walk by me, and she waits till she gets right even with me, and she says, "Good afternoon, Miss Conlon," and laughed. She knew very well what I was going through. But for some reason, Margaret sort of picked up Liz and me. She would make an effort to include us in things. And we finally got up our nerve. Neither one of us knew how to cook. And I always ate on the run anyway, because that was what my job was like. And, you know, it was TV dinners or whatever. We ate together. We decided to invite Margaret to dinner. And would ask Don Mahler and Peter Saul as well. They would bring her up to Westchester County for dinner. And to our great surprise, she accepted. And Liz and I spent a week laying out the strategy for that dinner and checking the cookbook. And I had a schedule. The roast goes in here at this time. Then the potatoes go in, the vegetables go in. One comes out and the other goes in. Right? And we knew she loved roast beef. Although later in life she swore she never ate meat. She certainly did. And it all came out. She came to dinner. It was lovely. And from then on, she would come up to the country a lot. It would get her out of the city. She'd come on a Sunday. With Fred and Ella usually. And spend time. And then after I moved to Myrtle Beach, I would see her in the summers. And then when she moved to Myrtle Beach, about a year into her being there, she was beginning to become very frail. Margaret had never kept the stub of a checkbook in her life. She just didn't do it. And Tex, who was her executor and had power of attorney, he started getting the bank statements. And he noticed there was this big drop in her bank account. He got alarmed. So he called her and he said, "All right, Margaret, the day has come. I'm invoking the power of attorney. We've got to get somebody to take care of your checkbook and be in charge of this stuff. You have to do it. And it will take it off your mind." And he said, "Who do you want?" She said, well, I don't know. She said, what do you think? And he said, let's ask Ann Conlon. So when it started, all I was going to do was keep that checkbook. That's it. I was just going to pay the bills. There was only one person working at that house. That was it. You know. So I said, all right, I'll do that. Before it was over, there was a staff of 11. I was overseeing the house. I was acting as mediator and stuff. There were 8 to 11 people in that house. Margaret got more frail. You know, like there was more and I started doing her Medicare stuff. You ever had to do that for anybody? It's a mind-boggler. And then, so I was very involved. And I would go over and check on the, you know, I'd see her every week, take care of the bills. And in the end, and I knew this, I always knew, we tried our darndest. We hoped she would never have to die in a hospital. She hated them. And we did everything we could. I got her to sign a living will. We were praying, Baba, please let her go to sleep. And I knew it was never going to be that easy. It was not going to happen. It wasn't going to be that easy for us nor for her. And we had rehearsed in our minds what we do when the day comes. She collapses. You get on a list of 5 nurses. Get one of them first, see what's happened, make a decision. If the nurses aren't available, you get the doctor. Well, the night it happened, and this is after, Margaret had announced to me one Thursday night, she said, Ann, I know I owe you 1,000 apologies, but I don't remember why. She said, I am saying this because I know now that I cannot live. I am going to pop off at any moment, and I do not want anything left on the table between us when we part. I couldn't remember if she owed me any apology, but in the process of that next week, I accepted it because it was so on her mind. She kept insisting, she kept calling me back. I need to apologize to you. And I finally said, look, I don't remember anything that you ever did to me, but I accept it. Is that what you want? She said, yes. I said, all right, then we are all clear. And less than a week after she had told me she was going to die, she collapsed. The 2 girls in the house, Peter Saul was with her, went down this list of 5 nurses. Not one of them was home, and the doctor wasn't home. So Barbara Doan called me at home. She said, what do we do now? And I said, you call that rescue squad, you get that gate open, and we're going to the hospital. And I went over to the house, and Margaret had had some kind of seizure. Rescue squad came. I had the living will in my pocket. And so they could not put her on a life support system in that state. We took her to the hospital, in the emergency room, and the doctor said she's not going to live through the night. He said, do you have a living will? And I had it. So they just, by that time, a whole group of people had arrived at the hospital. Her entire staff of 8, 9 people and some friends. So they just gave her oxygen and a transfusion, and she was bleeding internally. She'd had a GI bleed, probably caused by a reaction to arthritis medicine. She had been in severe pain for the last 6, 8 months of her life. Seldom showed it. So the doctor said, we are going to take her upstairs to a room. You may all go up. He said, I do not expect her to make it through the night. Well, she did. She made it through 4 days. She came so close to making it. The doctor said she had never seen such an incredible will to live. That Margaret's blood pressure would drop, and then all of a sudden it shot back up to normal. She said, you only see that in elderly people who have that very, very strong will to live. But when we went up to her room, she had had another seizure in the emergency room. Went up to her room, she was only sort of semi-conscious. And I was sitting in a chair next to the bed, and my face was very close to the bed. And she opened her eyes, and she saw me, and she smiled, and she said, forgive me. You know, and I just, yes. And she closed her eyes, she started to go to sleep again. And she would come awake and she recognized everybody who was in the room, all the girls who took care of her, and spoke to them. And she drifted off again. And we decided that by then it was 1 o'clock in the morning. And it looked, she was going to make it through the night. We decided to go home. The staff had moved into the hospital. They were keeping the same schedule. The night crew came on. And as I started to leave that, I got up first and I started to go out of the hospital room and I turned back and there's just one small light in there. Her whole staff was around that bed, sort of bent over like this. They looked like a canopy of angels. You know, it was so beautiful. She suddenly woke up, saw them all there, and she said, "Oh!" Go away! You know, with great force. Well, the next morning I got a call. Come to the hospital right away, 7:30 in the morning. She's had another seizure. She's going. When I get down there, she recovered from it again. So I stayed. I kept trying to go to work, and it was obvious I shouldn't do it. I never did go back to work, I think, for the 4 days. I just stayed in the hospital. And at one point, I went back into a room. I had called Tex, told him to come. Peter was there. Ella Marks was coming. Several of the other dancers as fast as they could. And we knew she would wait for Tex because they were the oldest and the best of friends. And I was in there. She woke up again. I was standing by her bed. And she looked up and she smiled. She put her face up like a kissing thing. And I started to lean over to kiss her. I had this jacket on. She grabbed me by the lapels with both hands. And there were bars on that bed that were up to my waist. And I'm no lightweight. She weighed less than 80 pounds at the time. She pulled me right over the bars of the bed. And I just went. And I kissed her face. And then she pushed me away a little, took her hand. She grabbed me again. Push, pull, push, pull. 3 times. She did the same thing to Dana Ferry, who was one of her staff, and to Ambika Sharan. It's an older woman who had arrived in Myrtle Beach just when we needed her at Margaret, had hospice experience. After Margaret had died, there was a memorial program at the center, and Sheila Quincy put together this videotape of Margaret's life, and in it, this little piece of film of Margaret with Baba at the center, probably 1958. And there's Baba. This, push, pull, 3 times. And Dana and Ambika and I sat there. We knew that looked familiar. Well, Tex finally got there. He came on Saturday. And what Margaret did with him, he went and he sat on her bed. She opened her eyes, she knew him, they talked. She reached up and she took his hands. A dance. Dancing with his hands. This flow of movement. And he is smart enough just to go with it. Just let her do what she was wanting. This whole dance of hands. And we knew that once he had gotten there that it wouldn't be long, that she was going to go. She did want to see him. She kept asking about him. And when Sunday came, she went into a coma. And some of us were about to leave the hospital about a little after 8. And Ambika, it was her turn for the night shift in Margaret's room. And we had made this arrangement, like Tex and Ella Marks were staying at my house. So Ambika said, who do I call first if something happens? He said, call me, I can get Tex, Ella, The other dancers at the center, someone in the center will go and get them. Then we can call other people. So for just a few minutes, we're still sitting in a lounge. And suddenly that door goes banging open and Ambika says, Ann. And we jumped up. Margaret had gone. And Ambika remembered what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to call me first. And we went into Margaret's room. And somebody who did not know Margaret very well said, well, let's say the Master's Prayer. And I said, okay, fine. And we said that. And then he said, how about the prayer of repentance? And I said, I really think that's gratuitous in this case. He said, no. And he said, well, suppose we sing the Arti. And I know how Margaret felt about rite, ritual, and ceremony. And we were getting, and this was a routine thing that had happened at death. And I thought, no, we're not going to do this. I said, no. And Dana said, how about we give them the beginning because she loved it so. And Jeff Wolverton happened to be there as well. And Jeff and Dana started to sing Begin the Beguine. So beautiful. And about 15 other people there, and it was so soft, so gentle, you know, and perfect from Margaret. And when we finished that, I just felt moved to say, fare thee well. Good friend. And thank you. And thank you, Baba, for Margaret. And, you know, I may personally miss her very much. But there was also some, she only lived at Myrtle Beach for 39 months. And it's obvious not only to me, but to a lot of other people, that she had a tremendous impact on that community in that short time, and her absence is felt. There is a vacuum. That presence is gone. We were hardly aware of it because she was so quiet. So quiet. But it was, I feel extraordinarily lucky to have known that woman. And we had a wonderful time. We had a lot of laughs. They were very good years. I'm very grateful for them. Grateful to Baba to have known her. And grateful to him for allowing me to go on with this book. That's a real gift. Jai Baba.
Thank you.